Hey you guys, this is Jess with Sourceful Journey, back with another video. So it's been about a few days, about a week since I've been off the camera. I've actually been working on some other projects at this time, so I will go into details about it as time progresses onward, but just know it's all for good reasoning. So I wanted to do a quick story time. It was just more so tied into the notion that when God says to move, one should truly just do that. Just move. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and go right into the story. So story time. I remember I was at a particular point in my life where I was living in this one environment and I just gotten so accustomed to it, but it wasn't really what my heart truly desired. I just wanted more. And actually, this was prior to me moving into the environment that I am in now in terms of the high-rise space that I live in. And I don't know, I've always been drawn to areas kind of similar to this, that is like in the hub, the busy hub of a space, and that has the great views and the restaurants and all of that that you can think of. And I guess you could say more of like a city girl, but in, the good side of the city, to be exact. So to fast forward, what happened, I remember I wrote this on my vision board. I said that, it would be my dream just to be able to have, this type of space with this type of view, to be in this location and, just to be able to do it and do it comfortably. Now, for me, I don't know, something that prompted me to go online. So I started doing some searching. I went online, I forgot what site I went to. I think it was Craigslist, if I remember correctly. So I went there and I was looking online for any particular units or such that were available. I knew I just wanted to move back downtown. That was just like my heart. And several things started popping up. One in particular stood out to me, and part of the reason was because of the view, not realizing all the great things that were to come with it thereafter. So let me explain. What I mean by that, I ended up meeting up with the company that runs the high rise. I was given a tour of the place, things like that. As far as the price expectation, what I would need to pay for the year, things like that. The contract part of it, the part where you have to sign your name on the dotted line, if you will. All of that sounded all fine and well, and it was well within my budget. But what I didn't expect was for it to be available as soon as it was after having that conversation with them. But also, another thing, I think the part that I really didn't expect was for me to be approved. Let me explain. You see, there was a point, it was like around January of 2020, when I actually had to sever ties with the previous condo unit I was in. I had to sever it sooner than expected. And it was right after I renewed my lease, if you will, for that condo. The reason why I severed ties with them, because I was just really distraught. I just decided I wanted to just leave that place and get closer to home. Because that was right around the time that my mother had passed. I felt like my world was crumbling. I didn't want to stay within a space that really didn't speak to me any further at that time. I just felt like it was just best for me to get closer to home, so I did. I moved closer to home. That was a very turbulent time. I felt like all that I've acquired in terms of, like I was telling you guys, like I was once that girl. Those of you guys who know, those who have actually had experiences with family, past coworkers, you guys know when it came down to how I dressed, when it came down to what I kept in my space, when it came down to just the type of money I spent, like I was that person. But for some reason at that particular point, and I think I'm still humble about it, don't get me wrong, don't get that twisted, I was still very humble about it, but I was the one that was like that. And yet, I don't know, when my mother had passed, it was like a switch went off for me. It was like those very things that I used to love, I used to adore, became irrelevant to me. It was something I felt like really did not resonate with me any further. Like, it got to a point, you know how some people, when they have things of good quality, how they would sell the items, things like that. I was all about giving it away, or else just throwing it down the chute, the garbage chute, that is. You know, I was really that person. I just stopped caring. And I remember when I moved home, I felt like, okay, maybe this would kind of fulfill that void of me missing my mom at that time. I was just looking for something to help remind me of her, to keep me in, like, you know, remembrance of her. Not really understanding that that void was still not going to be fulfilled. You see, so I ended up moving back to that location thinking that this was going to, you know, take care of that feeling I had, that sense of remembering home, remembering her. But as time progressed onward, I began to realize it still wasn't doing that for me. It wasn't giving what it was supposed to give, if you will. So fast forward, you know, I took some time out in terms of work. I decided, I was like, you know what? I don't even really care about working with this particular company anymore. So actually the company that I was with at the time, I decided to sever ties with them. So I quit. It's just like, you know what, because I just needed time to me. And this was my first time ever in my adult existence where I actually chose to not work, or actually was not working. I've always been one that was constantly working. I never was without a job. And, you know, at first I was like, this is really, I want to say daunting. It was a bit scary because it was something that I was not familiar with. But at the same time, as time progressed onward, I realized it really wasn't that bad. And I truly needed that time for myself. Looking back at it, I do not regret it because I had myself set up in such a way where my expenses were going to be covered, all of that. I was very smart about it, even though I did a bit of spending during that time in my life, but I was very smart about it when it came to my savings and such as well. So I was able to self-sustain off that without a problem. Now, the part for me was when I started getting into really focusing on the notion of claiming and receiving it. You know, as Christians, that is normally the phrase we would say, you know, as far as declaring something and it's yours, you know, or what we often view as manifestation. Again, to kind of go back to a previous video of what I stated in it, you guys, we gotta quit being so hung up on the phrases, the terminology, and truly understand, truly sit down and do our research and realize that the very terms we use, the very phrases we use when talking about these things, it's the same exact thing. It's just we choose to, excuse me, we choose to give it a title that is more comfortable to us. But when you look at the crux of what makes it what it is, it's the same. So whether you say claim and receive it, or whether you say manifestation, or whatever the case may be, declaration, it's still the same thing. Now, that brings me to a point here. When I started to get into writing out my own manifestations, if you will, like things that I wanted to see come to pass, and that I know within my heart of hearts that faith without works is dead. I knew within myself that, you know, Jessica, you have to put in some work too if you really want to see some of this come about. Don't sit up there and put it out to the universe, put it out to God, to source, and say, okay, God, I'm looking for this to happen, and then just sit somewhere like a bump in a log. It doesn't work that way. So I knew within self that, you know, I wanted to still take time out for myself and continue on with my day-to-day. But I knew at some point I was going to want to get into a certain job. I knew at some point that I was going to want to move into this high-rise space. I didn't know which type of high-rise or where it was going to be, but I knew it was something I truly wanted. And I remember writing it out, and I'm thinking like, well, this is just a dream. You know, I didn't think too much of it at the time. I'm like, you know, I felt kind of silly doing it, actually. I was like, why am I wasting my time doing this? And I felt like, well, what do you have to lose? And yeah, lo and behold, that's when things started to roll. A few months out, the first thing I noticed was that if you guys look back to one of my earlier videos, I was talking about truly putting your faith in, and I'm paraphrasing, it was something about truly putting your faith in God, or truly trusting God, learning to trust the process. I forgot how I worded it, but it's towards one of my earlier videos. So I made a statement in there. I gave you guys a quick story time about that, how I went from one particular company, how I went through the interview process for it, and how it landed on February 22nd of 2022. So it was like a lot of twos, and it was at 2 p.m. that day was the interview. And how that very same day, that very interview I had with that company, they called me back and gave me the job. It kind of started from there and then it took off. So, and then I ended up going into this other company. And, you know, it's very much along the path of what I've done for years. But I knew that that was in my heart. And what's so funny is because while all of this was happening, prior to me even getting that job opportunity, I remember I was passing this one particular building, and I was saying to myself, that would be a dream. It would be amazing to do work for that establishment. And I kept thinking to myself, like, oh, that'll never happen. Even though I knew within myself I truly wanted to. And never would I have thought in a million years that literally a year later, I would be given an opportunity to work for that establishment. Now, mind you, that particular company, right? Prior to me beginning the role there, the high-rise situation, let's kind of go back to that. I was living further out south, like in the suburb area from the downtown area that I'm in now. And I remember thinking as I was going through the process, they were telling me like what the application fee would be and all these other, you know, additional fees. When you think about moving to an area such as this, there are going to be so many different fees and such that come with this. So you have to be open to that. And I kept thinking to myself, there is no way this is going to work. I'm like, I don't know why I'm wasting my time. So I'm having this inner battle with myself about it, like, Jessica, don't waste your time. It's not going to happen. Especially not a place like this. You're definitely not going to get in. Something kept telling me, you better step out on faith and make it happen. And I kid you not, I just felt like I heard my mom say that, because she used to always say, you know, you better step out on faith, you know, better, you know, go with your best foot forward. And I did just that. So what I actually chose to do, I decided to jump online. I did complete the application. And what was so funny, because the application fee, right? I had the application fee, but I was holding on to it tightly because I was thinking, like, what if I do all this and then they took my app fee? And then, you know, one wants to lose money during the app fee process. You don't want to, especially if it's hundreds of dollars you're putting into this app fee. It's just like, what if I spend this and then I don't get it and then they got my money? Like, so that part kicked in. Well, God truly showed out. The angel came truly showed out, and I'll tell you why. As I was completing the application, I went ahead and hit submit, right? So, I got a message saying my application was completed. Now, mind you, I didn't even submit an application fee at the time as I was working on the application. I had to do a double take. I had a tongue twister there, I'm sorry you guys. So I just got thrown off by this notification. What is this? Okay, something from my Instagram. But yeah, I was like, how is that even possible? Like, I had just did the typed up portion. I hadn't even put in my card information yet. And I'm already like kind of feeling a certain way, like, okay, I'm getting ready to spend a few $100s for the app, you know, the application fee. Wasn't too happy about that. But I was happy to get that notification. I said, okay, now that I got the notification that my application was completed, but yet I didn't submit the app fee yet. I'm like, okay, let's see how this goes. I'm like, chances are they're gonna probably notice that when I do go in for the final stage of the process to, you know, see what happens. So I ended up going back up to the building, going back to this high rise here. And, you know, I went into the main office to complete whatever else needed to be done. It turns out there was nothing else that needed to be done. Somehow it triggered on their end that I did submit the application fee when I actually did not. I still can't believe that to this day. If that isn't God or the team stepping in, then I don't know what is. I don't know what you want to call it then. But it was a blessing in disguise for sure. That part still blows my mind because I kept thinking to myself like, oh, at some point they're gonna notice that it wasn't submitted and then they're gonna call me on it. And if they did, okay, I would have paid it. Big woof, right? You know, just to be pious, to be on the up and up, if you will, as the saying goes. But the fact that something as small as that, even though it was a few $100s, you know, who would give that much money and then say, oh, okay, you don't get the unit, you don't get the condo, and then that's money that's gone. Who wants to go through that? But the fact that they made it where somehow the app was submitted without it, again, that was a blessing in disguise, without a doubt. So now, to fast forward, I am now in this new space. I remember when I first got here, I was in such a shock. It was really hard to sink in because I kept thinking to myself, like, I remember why I really wanted this, and me wanting it and leaving it alone. I wrote it out, leaving it alone and not really focusing so heavily on it, but just trusting that, hey, maybe someday it will happen. That part, I think, is what played a huge factor in all of this. Is that I let it be left alone and allow God to be God without trying to force it. And somehow within time, it became a part of my reality in terms of my day-to-day existence. What's funny too is because I find it for myself, I didn't even notice. Like sometimes if you're thinking about something and maybe somehow when you're online or if you're out and about, you'll see something that correlates with that and you're like, wait, how the heck did that just happen? I don't know if you guys experience that, but I noticed that a lot on my end too. Especially as of this past week, it's so bizarre. I have to do another separate story time about that, but yeah. Well, we'll do a separate story time for that one for sure. But I say all that to say, you know, faith without works is dead. You definitely want to put in work. Meaning like if you have an interest in going to a particular location or a particular company, things like that, make sure you put in the work where you're simply doing your part as far as applying or, you know, asking around, things like that. Because those little steps that you do can actually help you in the long run. I think for me, because I have never been one to do the Craigslist thing because it seems so it's something that I would say very concerning. I don't know, I guess to each his own. It used to be fairly decent years ago, but now it's gotten kind of a bit sketchy. That's what I meant to say. But, you know, I kept thinking to myself, if I didn't get out of my head about the whole situation, if I didn't take that initiative to actually, you know, reach out to the company who owns this high rise and actually go through the process, you know, I probably wouldn't have been given an opportunity to pursue this or to actually live in this space if I didn't take that initiative. Instead of just simply writing it out in my book and saying, okay, I won't look back at it any further. The fact that I actually wrote it out in my book and then something prompted me. I felt compelled to go on this site. And I felt compelled to call this company. Like something kept nudging me to. Those nudges, I never would have had an opportunity to actually, you know, move to the space. Now, here's another kicker I forgot to mention to you guys. Remember when I mentioned early on how I had to break my lease? Well, I didn't have to, I chose to because I was just really out of it and I just stopped caring about a lot of things after my mom had passed. I was just like so over it. I was like, okay, I don't care about this, F them, F this place. I was just like, F all of it, okay? So remember at that time, I broke the lease. And this was like right after I literally renewed with them for that condo. You know, when you typically do things like that, those of us who've been through that experience, you know you are gonna be hit with fees, and sometimes they can end up putting that stuff on your credit because you were in a contract to stay on for another year or so, and then yet you broke the contract, so you're going to be hit with fees, and if you don't pay those fees, it goes directly to your credit. So that was what I encountered. Now, what was funny, this is how I have to say it's God, but don't worry, I paid the fees. I'm good there, okay? But what was funny, because at the time, when I applied for this the space that I'm living here in the high rise, right? When I applied to live here, you know, they have to check your credit and all that, see your score. They're gonna see all that good stuff, right? Even if you had any bad rental history or owed any back rent, right? That was the only time I've ever had a bad rental history, if you will. I wouldn't say it was bad, but the fact that I owed because I renewed my lease and I just didn't stay. So that, for some reason, and at that time, it should have been on my report. It should have already been reported by that time, because it was quite some time out since I had left my condo. But for some reason, it wasn't on there. So, because if they would have saw that, if they would have actually came across that, that probably would have definitely X'd me out of being able to move into this high rise. And for some reason it wasn't on there. What's even more crazy is because after I moved in and I got settled here, I went and checked, I think like maybe a few weeks or maybe a month later, I just went and did a random check on my credit report. That past balance I had from the previous condo unit I was in all of a sudden appeared on my report. So it's so weird how that happened. If you guys are following me here, like, it should have been on there. I mean, I'm glad it wasn't, but it should have been on there prior to even moving in. But if it were to have been reported on there prior to moving in, I would not have gotten the unit. But the fact that it populated like a few weeks to a month later, literally after I moved in, I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting how that panned out as well, but no complaints. And so I knew I was going to eventually do it, and I knew eventually I was going to have to tackle it, so I went ahead and paid it off. I'm like, forget it. I'll go ahead and pay it. It was only a few thousand anyhow. It was like maybe, was it 4? I think I only had like a balance of like 4 or 5,000 that I need to pay on it. I just went ahead and paid it. But, you know, looking back at it, it's just so weird how that worked out, because I was able to still get into the unit prior to even hitting my credit report, where that could have prevented me from being able to get into the unit, if that makes sense. So it's weird how stuff like that works, but I still have to say that all in all, this journey has truly been a blessing within itself, like no other. I guess the point I want to drive home, especially when it comes to the notion of moving, whether it comes to moving into a new space, or whether it comes to moving into a new company, like a new establishment. When God says move, just move. You know, don't question it. There's a reason behind it. Kind of going back to my previous video, when I was working for that one company, and I kept seeing all these different signs, synchronicities. I'm like, God, are you telling me to quit my job? And I remember I was having this conversation with God. I felt like, wait. Not aloud, of course. You don't want to come off like you're crazy. And even those who do it, they just got to a point that they stop caring, right? They don't care what people think, if they're crazy or not. And again, I'm the type of person I won't even make fun of those individuals, because I know there has to be some truth behind it for them. But, you know, internally, I'm thinking to myself as I'm seeing all this stuff, like, are you telling me to quit this job? Like what am I gonna do? And I remember even with that little scenario that I mentioned in my earlier video, you know, I realized that the more I started to wonder, the more signs started popping up like, yes, you need to do this. And I'm like, okay, God. So I remember taking that step, and, you know, looking back at it, I kept thinking like, wow, what if I didn't listen? What if I did not take heed to the messages, the signs and synchronicities that were being thrown out there, and I decided to say, you know what? It's just a coincidence. I think a lot of us who know, especially those of us who are tied to the spiritual space, we know there is no such thing as coincidence. And it's time for people to start understanding that and accepting it for what it is. Because little do you realize you're doing a disservice to yourself by choosing to ignore the signs and synchronicities and choosing to just follow what the crowd does. Sometimes it's going to require you to step out of your comfort zone and go against the grain. Not in doing anything that's illegal and against the law. You definitely don't want to do that. But when it comes to going against something, when it comes to going against something that you typically would not do, just because you are feeling those nudges or feeling compelled to do so, just do it like Nike. Because little do you know, that might be a stepping stone leading you into the right direction of what your heart truly desires. It might not make sense at the moment, but rest assured, as time progresses onward, it will start to all come together for you. You just have to have faith and understand that it's all happening for a reason. And that's something that I had to truly learn in my journey. And hopefully this can help others in their own way figure it out on their end when it comes to their own journey also. That is all for today's video in reference to the notion of when God says move, you better do just that. Move. So what are you guys' thoughts? Think of a time when you had a scenario where, you felt like in some way God was telling you to move in some way, whether it is to switch jobs, whether it is to leave a certain family dynamic, or maybe it's dealing with, I don't know, maybe with giving up a bad habit. And you had to go cold turkey. Like for instance, maybe someone who was a chain smoker, and maybe something compelled them, pushed them to say, you might want to stop doing this. Or if someone's a heavy drinker, as an example, you just never know. So many different scenarios. But the point I'm trying to get you guys to think about a time where you felt the urge or the nudge, like something was telling you that you needed to do a certain something. And when you did it, the fruits that came from it, how did you feel when you finally made it towards the end and you obtained what you were truly looking to aim for by simply following that nudge? It'd be good to hear you guys' stories about that. Don't forget to like, comment, share if you haven't done so already. You guys have been amazing when it came to the responses you would send me on my other platforms. Definitely keep that going. And I'll also continue to leave comments in the comment section here. It's completely fine with that as well. Consultations are still open. And thank you guys, thank you for the ones that have been showing up to the consultations on time. You guys have been very punctual about that. I truly appreciate it. There are a few one-offs, but some that got kind of lax in reference to showing up to their appointment on time. But, your reasonings are totally understood. But let's just keep in mind that, we have to stay on schedule. And I hope you guys would make it a key focus to do so as well. But again, thank you for all of those who have showed up to their appointments on time. So other than that, you guys, as always, I am going to be sending you with love and light, and I will see you in the next video.